Hi everyone, welcome to this first music industry insight session. Um, Today we're talking getting release ready. So this is the first of 5 sessions we do. We do these sessions every year, refresh them, bring them up a little bit, with the idea being is to kind of like back to basics on if you're an artist or a rights holder, like looking to kind of build what you're doing, get your music out there. This is sort of like what we think are relatively fundamentals, things that are kind of like best practice in terms of a number of things. So on this series, I'm jumping in today on getting release ready. Then I think next week it's a session on promotion and marketing, managing your royalties, on live opportunities, and then what kind of funding is out there. So what you'll find is it's especially with the nature of today, getting release ready. That I will talk about. I'll mention a few things about like how royalties are perhaps affected by it, and other things, and even promotion and marketing. But I'll sort of leave them for today, and there'll be a deep dive into those things over the coming weeks, really. Um, so yeah, if you've not met me before, I am Whiskas or Sam. I basically run Launchpad, music leads, music local. Kind of founded it in sort of 7 or 8 years ago, really. Um, but I'm coming to this as well, also as a lecturer at Leeds Beckett University. So I still founded the BA Music Industries Management course, where I basically teach bits of this every year and have done for 10 years, which is kind of like really useful in terms of trying to make this information accessible. So which which I hope you do. Um, and so I'm kind of sort of trying to bring that experience of talking about what a broad range of people are looking to get out of this. Obviously through Launchpad we have a number of different programs now. I'm sure you're all aware of that from being on this call, but because of the nature of the partnerships we have with Kicker and Centric and in my North now, we're really able to kind of talk, I think, from quite a lot of experience with, especially this one in terms of getting release ready. Um, I also have the benefit of like working with a number of other funders. So I'm an advisor for PRS Foundation and Help Musicians and Use Music, which basically means that I relatively frequently sit on their panels and talk to them about the funding that they're giving out, which again kind of means that I'm sort of sitting around a table with other people, sort of trying to support artists across the country and in different scenarios. So I'm getting that insight. And I guess where I'm coming from is my own past experience. So, if you're not aware, I used to run a record label. I used to run a different record label 20 years ago. I started a record label called Dance to Radio, where we were lucky enough to sell sort of sell about 250,000 records by my own, not 250,000, but my own band, but mostly by a band called the Pigeon Detectives. But my band was also kind of I was lucky enough to tour across the UK, Europe, and America, sign licensing deals, distribution deals. But I've also worked as a producer for other artists and run a venue back in the day as well. So I've had like little bits of involvement. But actually now through Launchpad, we're doing bits of almost everything, bits of record label, bit of artist management and stuff. So we're kind of involved in a really wide range of artists. And when we like what I'll talk about today is really driven from all of that experience of working across lots of different kinds of campaigns. What people like yourselves tell us when we have the sort of advice sessions, but also our direct experience kind of with releasing records through all our partnerships as well. So what we're going to look at today, it's getting release ready. So we're going to sort of start off from the basis that you're looking to release some music, and I'll kind of guide you through that. Now I'm sure many people on the call today, and looking back, you've probably already released some music, but I'm going to kind of start from like a freshness in terms of like how to approach it when you've got new music really. And as I said, the different steps that you can do, and then some of it will filter off into stuff that we'll talk about on the other calls, like promotion and marketing and royalties. But I'm going to sort of try and guide you through that process. It is going to be heavily focused on servicing what we call DSPs. DSPs are digital service providers, so that's the collective name for things like Spotify and Apple Music and so on. I do think it's really important that you're looking at building a fan base sort of more holistically, that it's not just focused on kind of getting the numbers through those platforms, but that is the main way in which people are distributing their music. And I think you obviously you can build fan bases through that as well. So we will focus on that. I will touch on a couple of different options as well. But it's really important to think about what you want to get out of releasing music, which is hopefully will kind of like permeate through what I'm going to talk about today. So planning and goals, starting off with things. Sort of like when you come to releasing some music, I do think it's quite important to think about what it is you're trying to achieve from that. And that might be a bigger project, like you're approaching releasing an EP and or an album. Or it might be you've got 2 or 3 tracks, like what are you trying to get out of that? It's important to think about you don't need to rush your releases. A lot of people are really keen to get music kind of directly out onto Spotify and share with their friends and kind of fans, or they might have a gig coming up and they want to make sure that people coming to that gig can hear that new music. But taking everything into account, it's thinking about like what makes sense. Why are you releasing it? A gig is a pretty good reason to release a song. But is it important that it's that song at that point? Quite often, when we're working with younger artists, they've written a song and they want to get it out there. Or they think that people are missing them and they haven't heard of them for a while. Often it's really, really easy to internalize a lot of that. Actually, if you're leaving it a month, 2 months, 3 months, is that a disaster? Or actually, if you give yourself more time to plan, or like a lot of what I often say is like plan the next thing. If you're releasing something but you don't know what's going to happen after that, you often end up sort of chasing your tail and not quite prepared for sort of more medium term release plan. So, it's very good to kind of stop and think about a 6 month, year, 18 month, 2 year plan, especially once you've released a few things. Maybe the first couple of things you ever release, it's really nice just to get some stuff out there. But at that point, you're trying to build a fan base, maybe impress people in the music industry, thinking about how it kind of gradually builds. Especially if you're sort of early in career, hate to break it to you, people are not necessarily, waiting on tenterhooks for that next thing. Or if they are a small number, they're probably going to wait. And if it's really good, they'll love it whenever it comes out. So making sure it's all right for you. And the other thing I'd say in terms of that as well is if you do start rushing releases out, obviously that can put a lot of pressure on yourselves in terms of mental health, and especially if you're trying to promote it all on socials. So again, giving yourself longer and planning it in, and meaning that you're not kind of having to be overreactive, can really, really help you make the most and enjoy those releases as well. So, a couple of things just to think about straight away when you've kind of got music and you're thinking about releasing it. You've written a song. Is that going to be a single? If it's just that one song, can you achieve everything you want from that song? Or actually, you're going to have to build momentum with one song and then kind of take advantage of that with a second song. So immediately you need more song, and you're already planning 3 to 6 months instead of perhaps 6 weeks. Which is the next point. Now, have you got something to follow up with? What comes next? You can only achieve potentially so much with each release. So once you get to a point and people are really into it, they're going to want to hear something else. So have you got that ready? I'm already talking about timescales. Have you got time to promote it? If you are really excited about a song, you want to get it up straight away, and it's going to come out next week. Have you got enough time to get everything ready that you want to shout about it properly? You can shout about it once it's out. There are some ways in which that works really well, but other people, once it's out, will want the next thing anyway. So can you plan enough time? And I do think the live thing is really important. Are you able to promote the release with live dates? I'll give a few examples later about how we've seen kind of streaming services kind of really jump onto artists and releases where there's obviously clear live stuff backing up. And obviously that's tricky for some artists. It's not always really clear. But again, we'll have a session about live that'll maybe help you, give you some guidance in terms of that. I also think it's really important with each individual release. So again, taking the example of like an EP or an album, which of the songs and how suitable they are for different kinds of success, shall we say. Um, Are you specifically looking for press coverage, or are you specifically looking for radio play, or are you looking for sales and streams? Is it something that's a fan base, or are you trying to, reach people? Are you trying to reach people in the industry and kind of like show them that you're kind of something to invest in and sign, or are you trying to kind of demonstrate that you're really, really good live? And different songs can do different things. I'll give you an example of I'll use a few examples, but with through our EMI label partnership, we worked with the rapper Chedu Araka, and he had a fantastic song on his mixtape called Counseling, about essentially about sort of men's mental health and specifically from a black perspective. And you know, it was such an eloquent track about those issues with Chedu. Like we really wanted to kind of raise awareness of that track. The song was a bit downbeat. We did not think that it would necessarily lend itself to getting radio play, but we thought that the press and the media would be really interested in it. We not only like the traditional press, but actually what ended up happening is we ended up working. I think Chedu wrote a sort of letter to himself through with the organisation Calm, the campaign against living miserable. And so that release, when we released that single in the lead up to the mixtape, we weren't necessarily focused on radio play. We weren't necessarily focused on sales and streams. I think we even released it on like an odd day of the week, um, because we thought it was going to reach a different kind of audience. And if you're doing a wider campaign, I think it's really important that you kind of consider that. If you're going to do a sort of campaign where you're releasing lots of music, lots of singles in the lead up to an EP or an album, if you're not going to get radio play with every single one, quite often now a successful song at radio can sit there for 2 months. And I am talking about successful tracks. Um, it can take a month or 2 months to build from release date, and then it can stay up for a month or two if it is successful. So you can't, in that meantime, you might release other songs, but you can't fire them all at radio. And I think that's also true even on a kind of grassroots and DIY level. If you're releasing lots of music and you're trying to send it to BBC Introducing or send it to different producers, they need to know like which one to focus on. And again, I'm sure that'll be touched upon next week. So you might release songs that you really want to, a song that wants to go to radio, and then 4 to 6 weeks later, release a song that you think like that's got an interesting narrative to it. You might release a song. You might equally like sometimes it's as simple as track lengths. You might have an amazing like set closer. It's like 6.5 minutes long. That's the kind of thing that you know that live promoters will really like, and maybe you've got some live footage to go with it. 6.5 minutes long, that's not going to get radio play, but it might get industry interest. It might get you helping getting gigs. It might be something your fan base really loves because you've got loads of extra content. You don't have to do everything with every song. But again, especially if you're building up to a like a package of release, like EP or album, you can think about like what songs sort of serve different audiences or different purposes, and think about what to do it. If you're just releasing and thinking that every song is, hopefully going to do everything, I mean, it's going to be really hard to achieve that, and ultimately, like even sort of successful artists aren't trying to do everything with every release. So, what are you trying to do with that first release from a project? What's the what's the track that's what do you want to do with that track that comes out with the whole project, and then what's everything in between? So again, having a bit of step back and thinking about that with the songs that you've written, I think is really important first step. So I've mentioned timing quite a lot, and I think it's quite helpful in this to be really quite specific, because when we're talking about getting stuff onto the streaming platforms, there are some really specific things in terms of dates. As general guide, less specific, when we're working with artists through Launchpad Plus, we really recommend that you have everything together about 6 weeks before release date, and that can work with press as well. And obviously we'll talk about that more in coming weeks in terms of approaching press for any reviews and stuff. Radio is a little bit different. I should probably mention that on this slide, because radio often builds from release day, but it's often good to get that then a week or two in advance. But again, the beauty of radio is actually you can hit stuff a couple of weeks after the release date. One of the things with radio that's tough is if it gets radio play before the release date, because then people might hear it but won't be able to listen to it. So actually, it's better to leave that later. With press, it's very hard to get press after the release date. You're really aiming almost everything for that, again, unless you've got a plan of a campaign building. Now, a lot of people, when we're talking about releasing music, they're very obviously very keen to look at the playlists, and for all its sins, one of the things about Spotify that is useful is it does allow you a process where you can pitch your music for playlists through Spotify for artists. Now, Spotify, the other good thing that they do is there's quite a lot of guidance around what they want from that and how to approach that. Now, with that, the main thing that they say is that they want you to pitch music to them at least 4 weeks in advance. So if your music isn't uploaded to Spotify at least 4 weeks in advance, they have told people that there is a much lower chance of you getting playlists. Now, we have heard of a lot of artists who release like a week in advance and do get playlists. But their general line is that the best chance is to make sure that your music is uploaded at least 4 weeks in advance and you use their online platform to pitch to them. They actually say that you are better doing more like 8 weeks, but that's obviously quite a lot. When we're uploading music through our Launchpad Plus, we currently aim to do it around 5 weeks. And I'll talk in a minute about how you maybe pace like a series of releases because you sort of need to have that window there as well. The other thing to bear in mind, of course, is that even if you've got stuff ready to go 4 or 5 weeks in advance, it can take a while to go from you uploading it to a distributor to it kind of sitting in Spotify's back end. So do bear those things in mind. So again, this is where we go for like 6 weeks is really good to aim to have everything together. I'm talking about Spotify here because the other services don't have as neat a pitching service. It's not as transparent with any of the other streaming services in terms of how you pitch for that. But I do think it's still a good idea to have everything uploaded early. Just a little note on dates as well, because this is something that can be quite confusing. And again, understanding a kind of best practice. Just to be clear, the global release day is Friday. That means that's the internationally recognized day for releasing new music. Every and any major album will be released on a Friday. And that's shifted. It used to be Mondays in the UK, but over the last few years, I can't remember exactly when, it shifted to being Friday. Spotify will tell you that they want your music to come out on a Friday. And we've been told if you are aiming for playlists, it is better to do it on a Friday. And I'll give you a couple of examples in a minute. However, going back a couple of slides in terms of what your purpose is for your release, it is very hard to get press or even radio for a new release on Friday because every bigger artist in the world is releasing on a Friday. So that is why you tend to see a lot of independent artists and kind of upcoming artists release early in the week, of which Wednesday has probably become the more common. The only reason it's Wednesday is really because it's the middle of the week. So and it's a lot easier to get maybe a feature in DIY or Clash or Noi or whatever on a midweek because it's less competitive than a Friday. And also now Fridays a lot of roundup posts as well. So you could consider a Wednesday. I've just done a check earlier today. There's quite a lot of new releases from people I follow today on a Tuesday. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday all have advantages over Friday if you're looking to get press. But Spotify will tell you for playlists they would prefer you to release on a Friday. If you release on one of the things we've been told in regards to playlisting is if you release on a Wednesday and there isn't immediate traction, that can count against you for being on a playlist on Friday. The reverse is also true. If it comes out on a Wednesday and it goes really well in the first 24 hours, there is more chance of you getting on a playlist on a Friday. I don't really kind of know where that stands. That's where they would say a Friday, you're not in that kind of lap of the gods. We've seen tracks released on a Wednesday not get particularly good traction and then get playlists on a Friday. Hopefully, you're starting to see a trend here that you're getting told one thing, different things can happen. I do believe in best practice through all of this. Through our label, we do most singles midweek because it makes it easy to get press. And then playlists are a bit in the lap of the gods, but definitely EPs and albums are out on Fridays, just for reference. So going back to multiple releases, then if it's as in a series of singles leading up to an EP or album, and that's something to think about. for sure, and how you build that momentum. And definitely, like our thinking on that is changes and evolves like quite frequently, mainly in terms of how much of a gap do you leave between releases. And we've changed that partly. There is a sort of train of thought that like 6 weeks is quite good, but also if a track has got momentum and it starts to do well, 6 weeks isn't actually, long enough, really, if one track starts to do well. So we definitely have changed from about a year ago, almost everything was 6 weeks apart. We've definitely changed that now to be more on a case by case basis. That's depending on like the artists and the individuals, like where they're at, like stuff's going on for them personally. Actually, like the seasons make a big difference. So don't really sort of like to release a lot in summer or specifically August. Certain things get in the way, like Glastonbury is a really bad idea to release around. Even things like Easter, obviously Christmas, are not great things to look around because people just are less aware. Fan bases just feel less aware of things like new music. They're not paying attention. Um, so we've sort of changed that so we do anywhere between 6 weeks and sort of 2.5 to 3 months between releases now. Again, depending on what we're trying to do with that release and where the art is in building. So it is really important to think. I think I'm about to spoil something that's on a future slide here, but one of the things about this planning of time is that, again, in terms of best practice that we do is if it is part of a bigger campaign for an EP or an album, we do try and set all the release dates up front and have all the music and all the assets ready at the start of the campaign. So even if we're releasing one track and the final track from the EP is out in 9 months, we want all of that ready at the start. And again, I'll talk a little bit about flexibility of who you're working with and distributors, but certainly the way we work is that there is flexibility in between. So if actually we find stuff changes, one track's doing really well unexpectedly, so we want to push another one back, we work with distributors that are flexible in that. And I believe a number of them are getting more flexible with that. But that's something you should really look at. Sorry, I've slightly digressed there. So just to be clear in terms of planning different releases out, Spotify and most streams, they want lots of releases because they want you to be targeting people back. Thing to remember about Spotify, I mentioned about the pitching thing is that you can't pitch more than one track at once. So if they want you to pitch it more than 4 weeks in advance, you pretty much need to leave a minimum 5 weeks between releases. Otherwise, you can't pitch it once the other track's out within that sort of 4 weeks. Part of the reason it's good to leave it that long is that one of them, even if you don't get on any big playlists, the good thing about Spotify's playlisting tool is that it puts you on your followers or people who've listened to you their release radar playlist. That is a really cool algorithmic tool that it has. And you can stay on that playlist for up to 4 weeks. So again, it's best not to kind of fire multiple releases through because it kind of limits the amount you can do it. We've definitely seen boosts, certainly in week 2 of a release, of stuff going through release radar. So I would definitely try not to like limit the potential for you to get some kind of organic algorithm stuff through there. So really, really, I would say, try and do 5 weeks between releases, really. Um, and like I've said before, like if you're doing lots of quick releases, it can limit the amount of press and radio you get because they don't tend to go back that quickly and do stuff. Certainly, like I say, if you've got success at radio, it could be really 2 or 3 months before you get that kind of traction with a new track on certainly on like national like Six Music Radio and stuff as well. So just in terms of timescales and a case study here, so you might have heard of this term waterfalling, where you release one track as the second track from a previous single. And to use that example, here is some releases from an album we released by an artist called Precept. The album was called When We Are in Bloom, and we released 4 tracks up until that release part. So you can see on the icon here, it's like the first track we released from the campaign was called Ascend. Then we released Bloom. Then we released When We Were Here. When We Were, and then the final single before the album was Glimmer. And so when Bloom was released, Bloom was track 1 and Ascend was track 2. When We Were was released, that was track 1, then Bloom, then Ascend, and with the final track Glimmer was there. And then when the album comes in its kind of natural form. And that has advantages because people, for example, when you release Glimmer on a release like that, you will get additional plays and additional people who just discover you through that, seeing what you are in When We Were with Bloom and with Ascend. And this has been a way that a lot of people are starting have been releasing through Spotify. What I will say is people are starting to change how they do this on Spotify and Apple because you can now do the pre-save album thing. But those are only open to to artists with a significant number of plays. I believe it's over 20,000 monthly listeners. So if you're kind of growing your fan base and you're not at that stage yet, this still feels like a really effective way to kind of build releases up to a bigger project, an EP or an album. But if you are starting to get success, it's definitely worth talking to your distribution partner about how you can do the kind of pre-save on Apple Music. It's called pre-ad, but you generally have to be at a sort of a level to be able to do that. But if you are at that level, that absolutely should be something that you are looking at as well. Hopefully that makes sense. So lots of discourse about kind of timescales and like getting, but what do we mean by getting stuff ready? Again, like we get a lot of people coming to us with a finished record, and then we have to ask them for like the artwork, and it takes them another week or two to get the artwork. And they may have set a deadline at a release date when they gave us the record, but actually it gets getting knocked on and knocked on and knocked on because they're having to get their artwork ready. So, as most of you will be aware, if you've released music so far, you obviously need a massive recording and you need the artwork. You can't even get it up on streaming services without that. But that is not where the assets stop. Even even because you don't have to upload them doesn't mean you shouldn't have them ready well in advance. So another thing that especially Spotify, but also Bandcamp and other platforms and all your social media want is every new release should come with a fresh kind of branding look. Not an overhaul at all for each individual single, but definitely sort of fresh promo photos are really, really helpful. We know that Spotify algorithms can tell when you're changing your images within your Spotify profile. So it's the best practice is to have like a new photo like to change with every release. Again, if you're doing this really neatly, you'd have like a color scheme. You know, maybe you'd be dressed in a certain way or in a certain setting for your press photos, but you'd have a different angle, you know, for each of them, and you'd switch that up for each release. And the reason Spotify and everyone likes you to do that is because it is interesting. Like if you're a fan, it's cool to see it's changed. It's like a different viewpoint on an artist. So before you start, you should think about having all of that ready. For each release as well, you should think about a press release. You should think about a description for the song. You know, can you describe the song? Is there a quote from you as an artist about it? You know, you might not do a big send out to press, but it's there if you need it. You might know a couple of people who might be interested. Then if you can format into a press release, then you're kind of way ahead of the game. And again, I'm sure we'll talk about that a bit more next week in terms of just doing it. And a press release doesn't have to be an overly complex thing. It is like, this is the new single or the EP. This is what it's about. This is how I made it. I hope you like it. That makes it a lot easier for anyone to write about it. Couple of things which are really great, and the first one can be problematic if you don't do before you release is number one is agree the songwriting splits. So if you are in a band, and even more importantly, if you're writing with a different combination of people, you really want to make sure that everyone has agreed what your songwriting's, you know, how you've decided who gets songwriting royalties of it before release, because otherwise that can get really, really messy. Some distributors will want that as you distribute, but not all. So it might not prevent you from uploading, but it will do that. And obviously, when we talk about the royalties, we'll talk about how that will impact registering on PRS and things like that. The other thing, which you really should have ready and kind of in a box ready, is instrumental recordings. So we in these conversations we don't go too much into things like sync, but if your song does really well, there might be an opportunity to get it placed on a TV program like Made in Chelsea or Love Island. If you get approached for things like that, that generally comes if you're working with a publisher. So that's something we do through Launchpad Plus or the likes of Centric that we know many artists go through. And they will potentially put your music forward for things like that. We've had it for Love Island. With Love Island, we've had 2 or 3 tracks on there. We get an email and we have like 2 hours to get them an instrumental because, you know, obviously they mix it over people walking around a pool. So if you haven't got that ready, that can be a problem and mean that you don't get to take advantage of that opportunity. So before you start a campaign, even though it's not really related to getting it up online, if things goes well with it being online and being released, you want to have that instrumental ready, so you can get it to hand. Right, distributors and getting it up there. Who will you work with to release your music? There's obviously loads of people out there. There's lots of different ways of doing it now. So some companies do it where you pay a fee per year to release as much as you want. You pay per release to keep it up there, maybe per year or maybe longer. A few of them will just take a percentage of your income. You have to view all those things. With whoever you go through, is there a way to speak to them? Really, that's the thing I would always consider. If you have a problem or you need to solve something, is there a way to work with them? Can you build a relationship with them? So if it goes well, can they offer you more support? This is kind of why we started the distribution side of Launchpad Plus, because a lot of people were not getting any support. And we initially, we initially worked with AWOL, who were a distributor who were independent at the time, because we could kind of like access extra support through them. We then moved to Kicker, who were absolutely fantastic partners. And Kicker, you can go direct with and get support. But again, for those of you not aware, is like we can help you release your music through Launchpad Plus as well. But the important thing is whatever you want to do is like how I would say have a relationship with the distributor. Some of you, some on the call, some people listening, will work with record labels or intermediaries who work with those distributors. It might be worth asking them like, what can their distributors do for you? Because one thing's for sure at the minute, there's quite a lot of options out there, so you can hopefully research them and come up with the best option pretty quickly and decide which works best for you. When you're ready to upload your music, please make sure you have all the metadata correct. We're starting to see more and more of the platforms are demanding things like proper, real names as opposed to performer names. Or within the credits, so that songwriters are tagged properly, performers are tagged properly, the producers are tagged properly, which is really good for recognition within the music sector. Apple specifically is known for kind of rejecting certain releases if that's not deemed to be accurate. Apple also want you to have your lyrics uploaded, which you can do, which again I think is an advantage there as well. And then here's my point, which I mentioned earlier, which is, when you're uploading, absolutely the best thing you can do is upload multiple releases at the start of a campaign. Number one, you're all ready then. You don't have to worry about getting that artwork for that third single done nearer the time. It means when one's released, you can get straight away and pitch. The other thing we've been told is, when you are trying to pitch for playlists, if you are saying in your pitch that this is part of a campaign that you're building over 9 months, and Spotify can literally see that it's all in the system, it gives them a bit more confidence about potentially supporting you and putting you on playlists than if it's a one-off. Again, we've heard stuff that's been uploaded last minute and with no other releases do really well on playlists. We also know people who've built campaigns and are getting regular playlists, and they've got a year of music uploaded to DSPs. I mentioned Spotify for Artists a few times. I think people are probably aware of Spotify for Artists, which is basically the back end of Spotify that as an artist you can claim your account and customize it, put your own images on, things like that. Not everyone is aware that you can do that for most of the music services. So Apple, Deezer, Amazon, Tidal, as far as I'm aware, there might be some more. You can all go and claim your account. Unfortunately, some are easier than others. Spotify is actually relatively easy to claim your account. Apple is okay. I think Tidal is quite hard. I'm not sure. I'm not sure even I've managed to do that, but maybe I haven't given it enough attention yet. But certainly, again, if you've got the energy, as much as you can do in terms of making that, right and getting all your information on there. If you're not aware, on Spotify for Artists, you can put a header image, you can put a profile image, you add your bio, you add links to your social media. You can also add your tour dates, which I'll come to in a minute. In fact, I think this is the next slide. Where are we? Yeah, here we go. I'll go back to that last slide in a minute. But yeah, you can add all these things. And again, on Spotify, you can build your own artist playlists. You can add canvas videos for your releases on Spotify. So there's lots and lots you can do that kind of two things. Number one, if anyone's checking you out, they can find out what you want. They can go and find you on social media and connect to you. But also, again, it shows Spotify that you're serious. again, I've seen artists with like nothing written in their bio that get on playlists, but ultimately, like if you want to give yourself a chance, you know, having that stuff there is really important. Two things at the bottom of this that are often overlooked. One is if you create a Bands in Town account, it will connect your tour dates on Bands in Town to showing up in Spotify, which again I think is absolutely fantastic. Excuse me. Oh dear. So yeah, you can yeah, it will connect what promoters are putting into Bands in Town. That connects with ticketing, and it shows up on your profile. So again, if people like you, again, if Spotify are trying to look at who to support, if they see you're doing lots of tours, that potentially gives it a boost. And I think we've seen pretty direct um, a reaction to that has been a thing that has worked. The other is merch. So you might have seen some artists have merchandise for sale on Spotify. Now that is through a platform called Shopify, which is a paid platform, which is slightly frustrating. But uh, but that is but if you can do it and you have merch for sale, that is quite a useful thing in terms of it connecting your merch through. Now it's a shame it isn't something like Bandcamp, which is a much more commonly used, but it is um still a very, very useful tool. But it might be something you want to look at when you are doing a kind of album release or something like that. So it's just good to know about, really. And when I sort of explored it, I thought it was good to know that it wasn't just something that was out of reach. Actually, it's quite easy to do. The main barrier is that you have to sort of Shopify is a very, very commercial tool that you have to pay to use. Um, just a note on YouTube, because obviously we're talking about things like the different streaming services and building a platform on it. Again, if you're not aware, YouTube works separately. Obviously, you can use upload to YouTube, but also it is likely that a distributor will upload an audio version to an artist channel. Now, those are sometimes not connected. So it will kind of, you know, your user-based channel that you do and your artist channel can sometimes be two separate things because one's been uploaded by you and one's uploaded by the distributor. Again, a distributor could potentially help you either merge those or make them seem slightly more cohesive. Obviously, the music that's uploaded to your distributor is more likely to generate income, albeit very small, that will then get fed through to your distributor. Whereas if it's through your own channel, you're kind of relying on YouTube's own kind of you have to kind of enact your own kind of monetization bit. So really, if you're going to make money, it's probably going to come through the distributor version. But just to be clear, like at a base level, that wouldn't be a video version, that would just be an audio version. Again, you know, each distributor will there will be some guidance about that how it works, but it's I suppose the main thing is not to freak out sometimes when that happens. It's about thinking about how you kind of build that into what you're trying to do. So I've talked about pitching Spotify quite a bit. So again, this is something that's accessible through their Spotify for Artists. You pitch them to be included in both their editorial and their algorithmic playlists. So by algorithmic playlists, I mean things like Release Radar and also Discover Weekly. Now, Release Radar, I mentioned it before, it's a really interesting playlist from Spotify. It's algorithmically generated and it's based on a listener's listening habit. So it is artists that they've chosen to follow, so using the follow button, or artists who've got music in their catalogue. And so if one of those artists is releasing new music within a 4-week window, it will go in a listener's release radar. So a fantastic opportunity for you to reach the listeners who are already who already know about you. I use it every week. I'm sure I'm in a, you know, not in the majority, but it is the first thing I do on a Friday is go and check that out and check out what new music there is by artists that are already familiar to me through it. Anyway, but obviously you also would get put forward for everything from New Music Friday to Melomania to Fresh Finds and all kinds of different stuff as well. So as I've said, Spotify recommends that you pitch at least 4 weeks in advance. Sometimes they tell us 8 weeks. But the bottom line is after 7 days, 7 days is the smallest window apparently. After that, it's very, very unlikely to get registered by their editorial team. A bit of feedback we've had from their team is that they do like for fans of, they like you to be direct. If you think listeners of specific artists would like your music, tell them in that pitch document. If you think there are specific playlists it should be featured on, tell them in that document. And if you've had previous support from Press and Radio, again, tell them. And they also like to describe the track. Again, if you've been on Spotify, there's a lot of very emotive playlists. There's a lot of stuff, like mood music or gym music or stuff around, atmosphere and vibe. So if it evokes anything like that, and it doesn't have to be like upbeat as well, stuff like rainy day and coffee shop, do kind of describe that bit of the track as well, and that, will hopefully increase the likelihood of it hitting in the right space. Again, sort of, I think credit to Spotify is they've tried to put a lot of information about what they want from this online. So there's a link here, and the slides will be online afterwards to the Spotify for Artists kind of like guide website found. If you're kind of feeling lost with all of this, it is quite good to look. There's some videos and there's some videos that are just kind of like, yeah, it's great to do stuff. But we learn this from looking at that and what the feedback we get as well. So, do look at the information that you get that they're putting out because it is useful. And also it does change. We tweak this every year. It does change bits. We can get all the tidbits that are useful. Yes, and here's a screenshot. This is from last year. I'm not sure if how it's updated, but again, it gives you a bit of information in terms of what you can do through Spotify, and I suppose like what they want you to do as well. They sort of reward you for doing the things that they tell you to do. So, moving on to promoting your release now, and things you can do once you've uploaded your music and you're kind of ready to go. Once we've got to this stage. One of the main things that's tough with streaming is this call to action, because it's very, very passive to say like listen to my music. And I think even the pre-save, that feels quite passive as well, but it's kind of the best tool you've got in the lead up to a release. So again, if you're not aware of pre-saves, you can use various different platforms. They're sort of ever changing. Feature FM, Smart URL, presave.io, to kind of input the details of your release and allow it to pre-save. Now, again, we hear that has an impact on Spotify, and in terms of playlists, we also know stuff that hasn't had a lot of pre-saves that's done quite well. But it is a good way to drive that through to your fan base as well, get them to invest in supporting you in that way, get them to remember that your release is coming. You can do lots of stuff like countdowns. I would say it's definitely better to do one than not, unless you have a strategy around like a kind of surprise release. When you do your pre-save, it used to just be Spotify, but now there's like quite a lot of different services that allow you to do that. A few things that often get overlooked because we're focused on things like Spotify that you definitely want to think about is don't forget to include an iTunes pre-order for download. I would say, especially if you're working in rap music genres, buying downloads is still a thing with that, and with other musical genres as well. Don't forget to have the music on direct, consider whether you want to do direct to fan and like have your music for sale. Most common of which is Bandcamp. So at the same time you put a record up for pre-save, you can have a pre-order on Bandcamp, which means is likely to have more money in your pocket, and some of your fan base will be on Bandcamp more than others. And don't forget to have a tool where you're collecting email addresses for a mailing list, because even if you have quite a small mailing list, those are likely to be the most engaged of fan base that you have, the most people who are most interested in hearing. And so even if that's 10, if those 10 though go and buy a t-shirt at some point off you, that could be some decent income for you. Again, you can find out where people live through that kind of system of updating them regularly, and that we'll talk a bit about that in some of the other conversations as a bit of an ongoing thing. But again, if you've got an opportunity for someone to connect with you, make the most of it. Some of what I've just said really. Don't just concentrate on one platform. Fans will go where they want. Downloads. And the other advantage of Bandcamp, there's probably a whole other talk on Bandcamp really, but you can You can do again that pre-order thing where you release one single and then they're buying the whole EP for later. Again, there can be reasons you don't want to announce that it's an EP yet, and we struggle with that as a label. We release the first single off an EP, we often aren't announcing that it's part of an EP until the second release. And so you just have to kind of use your kind of gut feeling when it comes to stuff like that. So yeah, a few other things like mailing lists. If you're new to mailing lists, there are a number of free to use platforms, the most common of which is MailChimp. MailChimp allows you to do a lot. It kind of kicks in once you've got, I think it's like 1,000 subscribers. It starts charging you. So at a base level, it's really good. It also allows you to tag the emails that come in, so you can say like this came from this campaign, from this release single, or like if you're doing it at gigs, you can say all these people signed up at this gig and you can tag them in, which means like if you go back to that place, you can email them all again, or if you do a re-release or a remix of that single, you can say all these people signed up for that single. So it's really useful there. Um, Also worth building fan communities. So I mean, a lot of people are doing a lot with Discord channels at the minute. It's not something I'm super up on, but there's a lot of artists who are perhaps a lot I've heard who are into gaming. You know, it's a very common platform for that. Again, some of you will use it for other kind of discourse. It's really good. Facebook groups is a sort of older version. If you're used to Facebook, it's quite simple. Through Launchpad, we've been exploring WhatsApp. Some of you might have seen our WhatsApp channel. There's a couple of different things you can do on WhatsApp. You can build communities. You can just do broadcasts, so it's like one-to-one. You can also do that on Instagram as well. There's a way to do that. So um, finding a way to sort of directly connect and directly message your fans, I think, is really interesting. Obviously, you need permission. Obviously, you need to make sure that it's sort of done in an appropriate way. But there's some really interesting ways, and I think some of the artists who are building deeper connections with their fans and therefore driving more listeners or kind of purchases are using those kind of things. And the final notice here is to like not basically not forget traditional like posters and flyers. You know, if you're playing at like gigs, can you make people aware that you've got releases out, or how to follow you on Spotify, how to get to your social media? If you've got releases there, can you kind of use things to do QR codes for kind of pre-saves and things like that? Really just exploring that. And I suppose there is a thing of finding affordable ways to do that. Also, if it's kind of quite time limited, so you're not going to be able to use it kind of longer term because it's a pre-save. I think that's something that's really worth thinking about, how you do that kind of physical promotion of putting it in like in people's faces. But needs to be done in the right way. Promoting your release then. So talking about like the messaging and the calls to action and things like that. Um, what do you actually like, what are you posting, like what do you want to post? And I think it's really really hard to like keep the momentum up sometimes once a release is out, which again goes back to the kind of long-term planning. There's actually quite a lot of things that you can think about before it's released, so it removes the pressure from you to kind of like on think on the hoof. The other thing about that, you'll see like 10 bullet points on this slide. A lot of people will post that a release is out and then not really have much to follow it up with. There's loads you can post about new music, just kind of like, hey, it's been out for a little while. Oh, did you catch this? I mean, there was an artist we released with earlier in the year, and it got some good momentum for 2 or 3 weeks. And I said, like, 3 weeks after release date, I said, just do a post as if it's a brand new song. Hey, here's my new song. Because if it's only been out for 3 weeks, it's still new. But life moves so fast. We think that people have moved on, but it really doesn't. People don't move that quickly. So feel just you can keep repeating stuff. But there's so many derivatives you can do. Can you talk about what the lyrics mean? Can you explore the lyrics? Can you talk about the artwork? Obviously, you can if you're getting press and getting radio, there's lots of stuff to share. Can you show, if you've got pictures from the recording, can you talk to somebody else involved in it, the producer, and talk through? Some will feel more or less appropriate than others. Like if it's a single leading to a bigger release, you'll want to save some of these things for when the full project is released. But there's still loads of little things you can do. Can you make a playlist of tracks that inspired it, or tracks that kind of remind you of it, or whatever? All those things. And can you think about how they land over a sort of 2, 3, 4 week period in order to help promote the release. Royalties. So, just a quick note on royalties when it comes to streaming. We're obviously heavily talking about streaming here. But a quick point I always like to make is that if you're uploading through a distributor, all the recorded rights income, which we'll go through when we do that session, they will go back to your distributor. So they'll go to us at Launchpad Plus or Kicker or CD Baby. But if you have written the songs yourself, then you will also get an sort of equivalent 18% of what that is as a songwriter that gets distributed, half through PRS and half through MCPS. Now, with a lot of streaming income, if you're talking, the small thousands of plays, that's going to be quite a small amount indeed. Once you start talking about 100,000 plus plays, and again, across a catalogue, that can really, really add up. And that's why it's really important to make sure that you're collecting PRS, collecting MCPS. You commonly collect MCPS through a publisher. So again, that's something we do at Launchpad Plus. It's something that Centric do, something that Song Trust do as well. So it's just worth considering that there is, if you've written the song, there's money coming out. And again, if your songs are being played on the radio, as well as PRS and MCPS, you will get PPL as well. That's mainly national radio. It is not a lot at all on local radio, but it starts to become quite a significant amount on national radio. So again, bearing in mind that you're the rights holder, and we'll go through that in much more detail in the managing your royalties insight session. So there we have it. That is a quick fire deep dive. Is it a quick fire deep dive into getting release ready? You are now ready to think about recording and promotion and marketing in a bit more detail, booking live, and all the other things that go around it, which we'll hopefully be covering over the next 4 weeks. A reminder, again, I'm very aware that a lot of people are going to watch this back online now. For artists and rights holders based in Yorkshire, you're welcome to book a one-to-one advice session with the Launchpad team if you want to talk about your specific situation in any detail. And if you do want active support in releasing and helping you collect your royalties, that is what our Launchpad Plus program is for. And you can find out a bit more about that on the website too. And again, you can book a meeting with the team and we can go through how we might be able to help you and on the basis of what you're already doing. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and do check out the other videos, and I'll stop the recording now.